Our disability is our greatest strength. It gives us a supervision to see the issues facing humanity from a more inclusive perspective and the grit to fight back against all odds. Welcome to Super Adaptables, the More Than Walking Video podcast discussion. Welcome to Super Adaptables, the podcast where people of all abilities gather to discuss pressing issues that affect the disability community and the implications for the world at large. We are your hosts. I am Corey Pheez Lee, C4, complete quadriplegic since 2005.
And I am Jonathan Sigworth, C7 complete quadriplegic since 2006, both of us hailing from the great state of Connecticut.
Yes, filled with snow. You got snow?
Oh yeah, we got like 6 inches. It's been a snow globe down here. I know that you must have gotten like 10 or 12. I don't know.
Oh gosh, no. It wasn't too brutal, but enough where it was just like, why am I living here still? But yeah, indeed, we are recording this on Wednesday, the 21st of January, 2026. And in a little bit, we'll be doing our wrap-up episode for our series on social safety nets and our last topic about accessible democracy. Don't get locked out.
Don't get locked out, indeed. And before we get into all of that, just a reminder that Super Adaptables is made possible in part by a grant from the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation's National Paralysis Resource Center. The information provided and opinions expressed in these podcasts do not necessarily reflect the views of the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. For more information about the Foundation's National Paralysis Resource Center, visit www.christopherreeve.org. Also, I should note that the views expressed on this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of More Than Walking either, but belong to us as individual speakers.
So, as you know, I got little ones. My oldest not so little now, but my youngest, is entering 5th grade. And, I can see how there's challenges that present themselves, and it's not as easy as it was the previous year. And so, their level of responsibility increases, and you're required to bring in more materials to school than in the previous year. Items such as pencils, crayons, and something to help organize your homework assignments are among the things that will help your kiddo throughout the school year stay prepared and strengthen their classroom participation.
Oh my gosh, and those backpacks start to weigh heavy.
Facts.
I mean, you're just setting yourself up for like spinal failure. You're not going to put those things in a locker.
Exactly.
As I'm sure many parents and teachers can attest, children don't realize how important these things are. They are being molded and equipped to become model citizens by teaching them to think critically, answer tough questions, learn to communicate through sensible dialogue, and work together in small groups, which hopefully in the long run will give them the tools they need to function effectively as adults.
One object that I think couldn't be more important to keep is a lock for their locker. So, the school gives you this long list of things that you need to bring, and it's usually just 2 locks for your locker and whatnot, one for gym and then one for your primary school equipment and stuff like that. It's about keeping things safe and secure. However, what you put in that locker won't mean anything if you forget the combination or accidentally lose the key, like some of my kids have. If you're unable to access the items that help you stay active during the school day, this means you can't be fully engaged with the other staff and students throughout the day. And on a micro level, this is what democracy can feel like when it's inaccessible.
Everything important behind a closed door. I mean, that's a great analogy, Corey. And on a macro level, we need to ensure that as citizens, we have access to all our tools and resources to participate fully in our democracy. And add to that, not just to participate, but understand, like to get to class, to get access to the knowledge and experience we need, to learn how to use those tools.
Yeah, I know throughout last year, I've harped on this idea of, the ability to participate in the process is to be well informed. We've gone through a fair share of, deep fakes and misinformation campaigns, not just here in the United States, but all across the globe. And the reason why I bring this up is that, when I watched the video The interviewer, when he was asking people walking around the National Mall about the basic structures of government, many of them had difficulty answering questions like how many branches of government are there, or what is the Bill of Rights? It makes me wonder how can we tackle issues such as climate change, national debt, or socioeconomic and healthcare inequalities of adults, let alone school-age children, lack understanding of how democracy works. Before you get your take on it, last night it just falls into the algorithm. I happen to watch like 30 minutes of why is Greenland so important? And it was just this whole historical thing about Greenland. Up until this point, I never really thought about the people of Greenland. They seem peaceful. You never hear about anything happening there except, their suicide rate is actually twice as much as the United States, which was like interesting. I'm like, man, wow. Um, but learning about why there's this like maybe this push for the purchase of it. You find out, oh man, it's tapped with all these natural minerals and resources and it's strategic for, all these great global powers. So if you don't take the time out to look into it, you won't know what is actually going on. So then when you decide that you're going to maybe vote or maybe you want to join the town council or something like that. Any form of government, you got to know what's going on. And I think that's part of overcoming the challenge of some of the issues we have in our voting system.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, it's true. I've heard many reporters say the same thing. Like we've been learning as much as we personally know about Greenland all in the past week because of the amount of focus on it. I now know that there's around 50. I think it's like 50,000 people is the population of Greenland.
56.
56,000
56,000.
people.
Yeah.
I mean, the other important thing, just since we're on this topic, is like the whole premise of purchasing or invading Greenland. It just doesn't make any sense because we already have bases there. They're our friends, they're our allies. We can make as many bases as we wanted there. And it's just it's a psychological need, I think, as the president described it, um, as the reason behind it. But uh, anyway, so I think you're absolutely correct. Like the greatest tool we have is the ability to be informed. And I think one of the major lessons maybe that we don't teach children when they or high schoolers when they're learning about politics uh, is that it's in the real world politicians lie all the time. Like there is no law against lying on the news or lying in public. It's only when you're in a court of law. It's only when you're talking to a federal official or taking down a statement. But when you're talking to voters, anything goes. And we have to prepare ourselves for that and be better prepared on we've talked about journalism. We've talked about how important getting accurate sources of news is and how that's a really important component to being informed. Um, yeah, so it's a big challenge. But as you articulated, this generation, Gen Z, young adults, shows mixed results in civics knowledge, with some studies finding significant gaps in basic government functional knowledge. For example, only 22% of eighth graders are proficient, while others data reveals that they often outperform older generations, such as millennials, on specific historical constitutional questions and value broader civic engagement like community problem solving, despite low confidence in their political understanding. They struggle with core facts, but show strong interest in using diverse, credible sources to understand complex issues like climate change and social justice. This kind of reminds me of like, oh yeah, I was best at calculus the year I took it. Now I remember nothing. So maybe some of those specific historical and constitutional uh, questions, it makes sense that they would outperform older generations if they're recently studied it. But yeah,
Yeah, and I
man,
think I think another thing that goes hand in hand with that is this idea that though you may not be able to quote every single amendment, that doesn't detract from you understanding that this is a issue going on, right? You don't, might not be aware of the greenhouse effect and how that all runs and photosynthesis, et cetera. But you do know that, the Arctic is losing huge slabs of ice, yearly, and that rises sea levels and it disrupts, the ecosystem. That doesn't take, rocket scientists to figure those things out. Um,
Well, I mean, well, and on to that, like, yeah, there's that general understanding, but you don't need to know the science of it. But then there's also like, where's your heart at, man? Like, is that
yeah,
important? Like, which is more important, your stock price going up or like the world flooding in, the the sea level rising? There's some heart priorities that do not require all the in-depth factual scientific knowledge.
yeah, you got to combine your politics with like some seated morals, I would say. A significant portion of young adults, around about 35%, feel they lack sufficient knowledge to participate politically. This is from the for Citizens and Scholars. However, one could argue that though you may be unable to articulate your views as well as others, it doesn't make you less concerned or passionate about the issues like we just said.
Absolutely. I mean, and as you mentioned earlier about the classroom setting, as well as during our community discussions, we've spoken about the beginnings of civics engagement, such as reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, how important that is, and perhaps coupling the reciting with a moment to educate students on the history and importance of the words and what they mean. All of this begins at an early age, but it has to continue as you get older. Otherwise, other things can get in the way.
Yeah, indeed. Me personally, I believe that civic engagement should begin as early as possible to grasp the importance of accessible democracy. And it requires spending a great amount of time gathering information to answer questions such as, who is voting? Why should I vote? And what are the issues that affect me and others in the world in general? In the book, that I read, Ethan Hollander, Democracy and Its Alternative, I found that there are so many ways that we engage in the political process. And you can educate children by using simple examples of how it works. Prime example. Um, so what is politics? Politics is the art of or science of governing involving the activities and decisions that shape how societies organize and lead, right? It seems so big. It seems so far-fetched, yet we kind of do it all the time, and it encompasses everything from making laws and negotiating between groups to managing a country's internal and external affairs. The key takeaway when teaching children on a micro level is the power to make decisions that generally adds to the benefit of everyone. Ethan uses ordering a pizza as an example. So let's say there's five of us. Two of us might be vegetarians, while the other three are meat lovers. The meat lovers are in the majority. However, that doesn't mean that we purchase only what they want. And you negotiate. One might say, how about we order half pepperoni and sausage and the other half veggies? In this form of decision making, you can see where compromise and adjustment can work in favor of everyone.
But I have to correct you, Corey. It's all about who's paying for the pizza.
And there's so and then that's another part of that. There's another part of that question. Like, do the people in the majority pay for it? Like, do we split it down the middle? Yeah, it's true.
Man, if only the political winners had to foot the bill. Unfortunately, the way politics work these days, it feels like the minority vegetarians have to foot the bill for the meat lovers. Oh, I, I think it's something more like the majority are vegetarians. There's one meat lover, and somehow the meat lovers convince the vegetarians to pay for an all meat pizza.
Mm,
I think that's the current illustration of how politics works. I mean, we could flip it. I mean, meat is,
yeah,
you know,
yeah. It's
but
multiple scenarios, but it's just the application is that we're engaging and negotiating all the time. He also used like an example about
absolutely.
a roommate, and roommates. He brought up a good question. It's like if I feel like I'm if we have this apartment and I have the bigger room, does that mean I have to pay more than everybody else, even though we're all trying to split the bill down the middle? And maybe I should be entitled to having the TV not in the common area. I can have a TV in my room. So there's all this work around and working out that we typically do, but we just don't really recognize it as
Yeah.
politics all the time.
No, and our everyday politics probably makes a little more rational, logical sense than the way it works. Um, but man, yeah, pizza sounds so good right now. But that is the crux of accessible democracy, that we have equal opportunity to participate in all aspects of the democratic process. And as we discussed during our community forum, we need to think about this um, as a social safety net more broadly. It's bigger than disability rights. It's access to polling stations in rural areas, issues concerning redistricting and gerrymandering, and perhaps nothing hinders, access to democracy more than the millions of dollars spent by corporations on lobbying and super PACs. And not only, also to mention, the purchasing of news organizations by entertainment companies, whereby they're no longer objective to actual investigative journalism. But unlimited spending in this manner distorts democratic processes by granting power to wealthy donors and special interest groups. And this really raises concerns about transparency and the potential for undue influence, and bribery in elections, ultimately cutting off the voice of ordinary citizens like you and me, Corey, whether or not we're in a chair. Like, I'm sorry, if you're able bodied and you're like working a 9 to 5 job, what chance do you have on getting the right information you need to make a decision in the voting booth when all these super powered, super funded forces are against you and don't want you to know what's really going on?
Yeah, it's true. You know, in a lot of ways, when I think about the millions of dollars, hundreds of $1 million that are put just simply behind commercials and ads and in campaigns and whatnot, it's ridiculous. So I listened to a couple pundits this week, and one of the questions was, "Well, where are you going to get this $700 billion to purchase Greenland?" Right? Like, that's going to somebody has to foot the bill, and it's not going to be just wealthy individuals. It's going to be the average citizen, right? But then we always have this question about infrastructure and shoring up our own our own states, our
Our own social safety nets. That was
own
the
social
argument.
safety
That was the
nets.
argument for cutting off international aid was, let's, money needs to be spent here at home.
And I remember we were speaking to, excuse me, one of our community forum guests, and he was, he truly believes that in his heart. That's what's actually going to take place. But the truth of the matter is, we're seeing it. It's not. It's just like, let's go out and spend more money. So last night, right after the Greenland video, I watched a whole. I think it was about 30 minutes. It was about 10 places in America that look like third world countries, and they named multiple towns, including historic towns like Selma, Alabama, and just the median housing house there is like about $22,000. There are towns here in America with running water, but no good sewage, electricity, lights flickering on and off. They're not getting paid any attention to, right?
Mm.
So if we have the ability to invest so much time, and these are rural areas as well. So it goes back to the point when you think about accessible democracy, these towns are abandoned because, industries that left it, um, they're no longer competing, or they were devastated by some type of storm or natural disaster. Where is the help in recovering those places and building them back up so that they can be just as viable before we start talking about doing anything elsewhere? But that was eye opening. And I was watching it with a friend of mine who's from Jamaica, and she said, no one ever sees these videos, especially for people who are coming in from another country to America. They don't see that. That's not accessible democracy. If you gave the average person wanting to immigrate and doing it legally, et cetera, all of that, if you did a crash course on this is what America really looks like in places, so don't expect to have some handouts to you when other American citizens are struggling. It would give people great pause. But not to get too sidetracked, but yeah, you made a good point. Time after time, we've seen countless instances where individuals have to bow out of a race because he or she does not have the capital to spend. Sometimes the person who has to exit the race early may have had their better ideas, but they were outspent to keep the status quo continuing and to keep one party in power. Makes me think about how our branches of government are supposed to work together, and to what level can our government, especially the executive branch, no matter who is president, be really held accountable if only that person's party stays in control, both legislatively, based on the premise that if you have enough money and you can spend, the powerful or ultra wealthy can install anybody to maintain leverage over the competitors because the politicians they back will enact laws that help to increase their bottom line.
Yeah, I mean that what you just described just sounds like a never-ending spiral, which is why it's really important for our legislators, no matter what party they're in, to maintain you know, their independent power in Congress, whether in the House of Representatives or in the Senate, to keep the executive branch in check. And as soon as we give up our ability to think critically, and just follow the leader, it really becomes that situation that you just described, where our elected representatives are no longer speaking for us. They're just rubber stamping something that will benefit their own political career. And that's a really, really dangerous situation. Um, and this also goes back, to an ongoing theme of distrust in our political systems, which, as you mentioned, during our community discussion, leads to voter apathy. Um, and before I'd like to talk about some other recent events that are happening both here and abroad. I think that get to the heart of what creates apathetic attitudes towards democracy and making it less accessible. But I just want a quick point about Greenland, something that you never hear in the news. I mean, you hear that they don't want the U.S. and I think I've heard people critiquing that. It's like, oh yeah, because they get welfare from Denmark. It sounds like just like cash handouts, but what they mean by welfare? People in Greenland have universal health care, Corey. Why would they ever want to change systems
Yeah.
to the American system? They're getting universal health care. They're getting publicly funded education. Yeah, there's similar things like child and family benefits and housing subsidies, public assistance for people who have legal residence and no other income, disability, retirement. But like the main difference is it's healthcare. That is the main difference. And to put that as a kind of a negative thing just
But
doesn't make sense.
John, too, another thing that the people and it's like a lot of territories and lands, somebody comes there and takes over your land that you've been occupying for thousands of years. Like, not to get too much in the weeds, but it was Vikings who found Greenland, right? It was Eric the Red, which is so funny. Eric the Red found Greenland because he thought I think he thought like the snow or something like that was like green or whatever. But people were already there. They had already existed. And they're living a life of getting food off of the land, you know, taking ships to other neighboring portions to be able to congregate with their neighbors and whatnot. That's their way of life. And people, it's such a morale booster when you can preserve that. But
Yeah.
when it becomes forcibly interrupted, that causes great depression. It has got to be immensely frustrating when you don't, when it's like, man, I'm not doing nothing to you. I don't even travel over there to America, and 99% of people don't travel to Greenland like that, and there's already something in place that was signed, a long time ago, where if we want to extend our military presence there, like we can.
Yeah. There's
It doesn't
there's
have to be this.
I mean, so to continue the analogy of uh, forgetting the combination, throwing the lock in your locker. Um, I think Greenland is an example of that. Here, if we're talking about the American dream and self-determination and what are the values of the heart that kind of align with what the values of America are supposed to be. They are not supposed to be taking away and basically stealing someone else's land, for your own. That has been part of our history. But that should not continue to be part of the history and willfully so. Um, and there's, a couple other things that have been going on, back in January 2025, let's just go back a year, when a passenger plane collided with a military helicopter that resulted in the loss of 67 lives. This incident was kind of marred by the president's insistence that the hiring of individuals with disabilities and others who fall under DEIA hiring initiatives could be to blame for situations such as that. And nearly a year later, the debates over DEI have continued to intensify with federal and state actions targeting DEI programs um, across multiple sectors. And companies have taken that language down. Nonprofits have had to perhaps hide language or say things in different ways in order to not be targeted for that. And it's just incredibly damaging. Um, and shooting ourselves in the foot. If we accept that diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility are not values that our country and our society should support. And then with the recent ICE raids and arrests, um, watching the news over the past weeks and months have this has been virtually hard to ignore. ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, has been in operation for over 2 decades, so it's not surprising that raids and investigations are taking place. What's alarming is how these operations are being conducted. It makes me question, what does justice look like in America for both citizens and non-citizens? What example are we to people who wish to travel here for work, its effects on the economy, and how will the idea of democracy and accountability be altered? It's changing the entire character of being an experience of being in America. If you're in a city like Minneapolis, experiencing ICE agents knocking down doors, pulling American citizens out of their homes without warrants, and detaining them for hours on end without any charges. And that's what's happening.
Yeah, man, I agree. I was listening to the young woman who was drug out of her car, and she told them that I have a disability. I have a disability. I was not here trying to protest or impede or anything. I'm actually here for a doctor's appointment. Uh, that's what's scary that's happening in America is that we speak about protecting the most vulnerable of our citizens, yet here it is, the vulnerable citizens, children, um, people with disabilities. Um, that's very frightening. It is very concerning because, you know, kind of what leg do we have to stand on if you can't hear my cries? If you want to take away the DEI DEIA hiring initiatives and things of that nature, then how can I be helped? If everything is just going to be merit based, I'm telling you, you're going to look at my disability first before you think about how highly skilled I can be. Um, but yeah, no, I agree with your assessment in the way that you framed it. I remember watching the president's press conference and when he suggested that, DEIA hiring at the FFA could be the culprit because the initiative focused on employing individuals with intellectual and learning disabilities, paralysis, amputees, and he even mentions dwarfism. And it's like, you kidding me? Like, first it was like just the air traffic controllers, but the FFA is a large organization. There are people who work in custodial work. There's a number of other places. So the way he went about it was almost like you took somebody that literally has like a intellectual disability and told them to get to coordinate air traffic control. Like that's a strenuous job. Everybody just does not qualify for every job. And we know that. We understand that just because we have disabilities doesn't mean that, you know, we're not hip to what's going on. We understand it fully. He thought like it might be detrimental.
I mean, what's crazy is, back to the crash, the pilot wasn't even an amputee. The
Yeah,
pilot didn't have a disability. No one flying those planes had a disability, and yet it was, this was labeled as the cause.
but it just took planting it as a seed of sorts. This is why we got to get rid of it because it's DEIA, just like with
Well, and
everything
then
else.
Well, and you start associating those things and you start having false memories and you start, like, oh, yeah, well, maybe the pilot did have, like, I just had to search it to confirm because I forgot. I forgot those details. I was like, where did this whole come from? Like, the most logical conclusion would be, oh, well, if the pilot was an amputee or had a disability and maybe that's why he said it, but nope, there's
No, there was like no
nothing.
evidence. There was no evidence for him to say that. But, that's what a lot of, like you said earlier, politicians lie. And if you can spin it a certain way, those who won't go out and seek the information for themselves and do like at least like, a little clinical research on it, they'll just go, yeah, no, he's right. Yeah, it was just somebody, some some person that they felt bad for and put them in that position. And now what? And then it turns out, what was the issue? It was pilot error. Pilot error.
Not following the flight plan.
Not following the flight plan. So, but having said all that, a person with a disability and who enjoys being employed, I want the same opportunities as everyone else. But sadly, I know that an employer will look at my chair first and assess me from that vantage point before recognizing my skill set. I believe that when a tragedy happens on somebody's watch, it is blame that they turn to because they believe it is their fault. When all the smoke cleared, the issue had nothing to do with the DEI hire. It had everything to do with pilot error and altitudinal discrepancies. Simply interjecting the thought that a diversity hire could have been the cause set a negative tone and, like many minority groups, places a target on our backs. The raids and arrests are equally disturbing. Watching individuals being dragged from their vehicles, schools, and homes is outright scary, and I get it. Illegal immigration coupled with committing felonious crimes is a problem, and enforcing the law on those types of activities is paramount. However, if I'm undocumented, and I still do something minor, such as steal food from a store, legally speaking, that could trigger an immigration check, and I could be deported. That's wrong. It's heinous to think that some minor infractions that many American citizens commit daily can come back to haunt you in the worst way.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It really is scary. I think I've had dreams of being in a protest and being taken away, and no one believing that I used a wheelchair, that my wheelchair was in the trunk. You
Wow.
know, it's just like,
You know that happened to a woman.
oh yeah, yeah.
She
I
said,
mean,
like, I'm a wheelchair user, and they're like, well, you drove the car.
this is recently in Minneapolis,
Yeah. Like, yeah, like, okay, well, how can you drive a car if you're in a wheelchair?
right?
Not,
I
not
mean,
recognizing,
and this is the point I'm going to make. They're not hiring the best and brightest. You know, when we're talking about merit-based getting rid of DEI, it's supposed to be like, oh yeah, only people who qualify get the job. We don't need DEIA. What's really happening is, unfortunately, it's not like people just giving anyone a wrench and asking them to fix this piece of equipment. It's the issue is throwing anyone a gun who is willing to do the job. And the result is that these ICE recruits aren't sufficiently vetted or trained to go after actual criminals. And so they're just pursuing anyone who looks or sounds different to them. You know, they're operating not on their own knowledge and experience. They're operating on their own stereotypes and um, what's the word? Prejudices. You know,
yeah.
in an article published on January 13th, 2026, Slate journalist Laura Jadid reported that she was effectively offered a job with ICE after attending an ICE Career Expo in August 2025, going through a very brief interview with minimum vetting, which allegedly took less than 6 minutes, and she completed no paperwork, no background criminal checks. And she was offered the job, and it said, even before she signed, that she accepted it. On the government jobs portal, it said that she had accepted it, I believe, 3 days in the future from the day she checked it.
Wow.
And you know, the goal is like they want to get as many ICE officers on the streets with guns as possible, and this is what the result is. We have no idea who these people are, no idea what their criminal history is. This is absolutely not merit based, and it's not even mission based. Um, it's scare tactics. It's, you know, sending a message that um, people who don't look like your typical American are not welcome here, and by typical they mean white. And even Native Americans are being caught up in this because they don't look American enough. You know, it's racist. It's totally unequivocally it's just racism. It's
Yeah.
there's no going after crime here. There's nothing else to it. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And then I don't know if you had an opportunity to watch his press conference. The president came out with, um, multiple pictures of individuals and the crimes that they've been, you know, convicted of, and they're roaming the streets. Listen, there are some convicted individuals walking around here all the time. I get alerts all the time. There's a pedophile that lives 6 miles from you. They have their name and everything. They're going to be a part of the community. So regardless of who it is, it's about kind of adjudicating them in the correct manner. No one, absolutely no one, wants to see somebody who has committed violent acts against another person have the opportunity to experience freedom. Like, we don't want to see that. We know that. But when you are swarming communities, when you are stoking fear, that is the problem, because you're going to scar generations to come. This is all on film. This is forever going to be etched. You know, my kids already have a perspective on ice, and I had to tell my son to say, but just be careful how quick you are to judge certain things. But even at his young age, it's affecting him now,
Mm.
right? that's not something I ever would have imagined that I'd have to plan for to have these type of discussions, and it aggravates me, it angers me, because how can I can only protect him but for so long before he is out in public as an adult and could be looked at as not the American person or the quintessential American persona and be wrongly accused of a crime. You know,
Yeah.
this is a very, very, very scary situation. Sometimes I have to take a break watching it on TV. I'm like, it's overwhelming.
With the killing of Renee Good, the stakes. I mean, this is not the first person to be killed at the hands of the police, in the U.S. by any stretch of the imagination. Um, but for our government to full throatedly support and defend that action in the face of so much evidence to the contrary that this person was committing any crimes, um, and was killed for it is such a frightening thing to behold. And if we don't react to that and question what's going on and what we have to do about it and our responsibility to do something to both participate in our democracy, even in the tiniest of ways, if we turn our eyes against this situation, we are throwing away the key and locking the door and never walking back,
Yeah.
into the building. Like we're giving up, you know.
Yeah.
These are moments to pay attention, and because there are few opportunities to claw back our power as people from moments like this. We have to come together. We have to stand in solidarity. We have to put away our differences and say no. Like our voice matters. Our little tiny individual meager wage voice matters. We should be able to elect our own representatives. We should have policies that reflect our values and our interests. Um, and that's it.
Yeah. And Dr. Cornel West, he put it elegantly when he said, you know, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, this was being done to black people.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, it's any and everybody. You know, there was a coming together of, you know, spiritual entities, political entities who saw that, listen, how long have this group of people been oppressed for? And how can we change things? Right. And then they enacted laws. The same thing can be done. Inciting this level of violence against American citizens, it's not, polls are showing that ICE occupation does not make people feel safe. And before it was ICE to this extent, at least in Minneapolis, it was the National Guard before that. Now we
Yeah,
don't even hear so much about the National Guard. Now we're focused on Minneapolis. And it does seem like a revenge tour of sorts. Tim Walz is the governor, that was his political opponent. You're attacking people and you're making a mountain out of a molehill. Yeah. And that's just what it is, from what I've seen and what I've uh, gathered. I think, yes, we need to make sure we are protecting individuals from coming into this country who have bad intentions. And I wanted to, not necessarily ask you this, but it came to my mind, how much like we talk about, oh, we got to stop the drug cartels and blowing up boats and stuff like that. But what about the person selling the drugs? A lot of times,
or
those are Americans.
or all
Definitely.
the political elites who are buying the drugs.
Yeah.
There
So,
was that bag of cocaine that was found in the White House last year.
uh,
Um, Yeah.
Right.
Well, and most violent crimes, are not committed uh, by immigrants at a greater rate than non-immigrants. I think actually non-immigrants commit violent crimes at a higher rate than immigrants do. So it's just to put that in perspective, and with that idea that it's people can get access to a gun and be employed by ICE without passing these background checks is just a huge red flag, because basically you may potentially be putting criminals on the streets to 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 exercise this mission. Um, but in any case, so as we conclude our podcast on social safety nets, we began by talking about the American dream, what that means, and how social safety nets are available to help secure this idea from getting away. And we've ended it by talking about invading Greenland and ICE officers who are untrained and unvetted kicking down the doors and grabbing American citizens in their underwear and pulling them out into the snow in Minneapolis without warrants. So,
Yeah, I mean, simply put, you know, 1 in 6 people, about 27%, and 1 in 3 children, and this data goes back to 2019, participate in multiple safety net programs. There's a need for these programs. I think the one that we covered the most, um, well, the one that we covered in May of last year really fits the bill right here, and that's due process, and that
hmm,
everybody should be entitled to it. Um, it gives every citizen with a disability, or not, those who may acquire one later um, in life, the possibility of achieving the intended goal of what the American dream has always meant: equity, inclusion for everyone.
yeah, absolutely. And other topics that we discussed, I mean, just to go down the laundry list of things that need improving here at home: VA benefits, Medicaid, the education system, due process you just mentioned, accessible housing or just affordable housing, food assistance, disaster relief, Medicare, the need for universal health care, Social Security, and disability benefits. Like, there's so much work to be doing. And we really do need to ask ourselves, what is our government doing to address those needs that really affect us on a day-to-day basis? And it is these programs that allow us to continue to participate even when shit hits the fan, even when our lives don't go as planned, or tragedy befalls us, or we find ourselves in difficult situations. It should, your situation and the family you're born into, the economic situation you're born into, should not dictate your ability to participate in your own government. And that's what these programs are designed for, and that's why they're really important to learn about and improve. So on that, Corey, thanks for a great discussion, and hope everyone stay tunes in. I hope everyone stays tuned in and signs up for the More Than Walking newsletter at morethanwalking.com. Um, Go there to learn about the topic we will cover next and how you can participate. Also, like, comment, and subscribe to our More Than Walking YouTube channel to watch each podcast, and click that notification bell so you are alerted when new episodes drop. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for More Than Walking or Super Adaptables.
Indeed, until then, remain encouraged, stay hopeful, and above all else,
Keep adapting.